All right, so we're going to move to the next very important. I'm going to wait for Michael to. It's easier to. I think it's Rob Grossi. I don't know what the official title is, but the next special report is Rob. So, Rob, I know Michael's working on pulling up the presentation. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. As Michael pulls that up, I'm going to talk today about the financial impact of COVID-19 and how it's affecting, how it will affect school districts. Much of the attention so far has been rightfully so on how it will affect academics, but long-term, I think the financial impact of the crisis will be just as significant, if not more, on its impact to students. As Michael's pulling it up, I will, there we go. Michael, if you turn to slide 2, please. So I'm going to talk briefly about the case for a sense of urgency, why I believe we're about to face a statewide fiscal crisis like we've never seen before, how the economic shutdown could impact the district, assessing the district's vulnerability to the crisis, and then the concepts around developing a plan to succeed in a post-COVID-19 world. If you could turn it to slide 4, Michael, please. So prior to COVID-19, Illinois school district, I liken Illinois school district's susceptibility to COVID-19 to an elderly person with multiple pre-existing conditions. The state was not prepared for this crisis, as evidenced by just 5 points that I'll call out. First of all, before the crisis, the state of Illinois had $7.6 billion of outstanding bills due. The pension systems were $137 billion underfunded. The rating agencies have downgraded the state 21 times since 2009, and subsequently, Illinois had the lowest credit rating of any state in the country. In addition to that, the state has no rainy day fund in anticipation of a crisis like this. Next slide, please. In addition to, so now the state, like everybody, was forced to close down their economy, and this is how it's impacted the state so far. The governor's office is projecting a budget gap of $2.7 billion this fiscal year, ending June 30, 2020, and a $7.4 billion crisis for the fiscal year ending 2021. Because the market collapsed initially, the pension system lost $4 billion in value. Now it's gotten back some of that as the markets rallied, but as the market goes down, that has an impact on the funding level of the budgets. And then of very importance is that Standard & Poor's drafted a scathing report that gave the state of Illinois at least a 1 in 3 chance of becoming junk status as a result of the crisis. And this would be a huge blow to the state because many of the entities that lend the state money have criteria that they can only invest in investment grade quality debt. So if they are getting junk status, that would have a huge impact. And just as an example, 2 weeks ago, the state went out for a borrowing, and where the rate would have been around 1% for the borrowing, they had to pay 5.5% interest rate, because essentially the investors are already kind of assigning a junk status to their credit quality. Next slide, please. So I just created these slides today. This is a deviation a little bit of what you saw, because today the General Assembly passed a budget. So the dilemma going into the budget was that the desired budget to basically keep everything flat was $42.8 billion. But the forecasted revenues were only $37 billion. So there was a shortfall of $5.8 billion. And this was the problem the state was trying to address. Next slide, please. So what the state landed on was that they were going to essentially keep everything flat from last year. And in order to make up for that shortfall, they were going to borrow $5.8 billion from an emergency fund that's available to all municipalities. So they're going to borrow $5.8 billion to keep everything whole this year. So evidence-based funding will be flat and grants will be flat, essentially. But they're doing it through a borrowing. So if you go to the next slide, please. Some of the key takeaways from what the state did today is, again, federal K-12 education will be flat versus last year, which is something a lot of people thought it would land on, but certainly the state did not have the money in and of itself to fully fund education. And that's an important point going forward. Without the loan, legislators were considering a 35% across the board reduction in the budget. And that's why schools were talking about scenarios where evidence-based funding would cut $2 billion. That didn't happen because of the loan, but that may happen next year. The state's hoping that the federal government will provide a grant that will be sufficient for them to pay off the loan right away so they don't have to incur a lot of interest costs. That's speculation. It's likely going to happen to some extent, but that's their stated objective. And then another point I want to make is there are some experts locally and nationally that are projecting that are estimating that the revenue projections are too ambitious and that the budget hole will actually be larger. But the main question for this year is nobody takes solace, even the people that adopted the budget, that this crisis is solved. It's merely the legislators came up with a way, to their credit, of keeping funding flat for this year, but it just pushes the crisis back 1 year. And I think the magnitude of the crisis has not changed. If not, it's been growing. And I think that that's something that schools are going to have to look at. Next slide, please. So the two major factors that would determine how bad things will be for the state of Illinois, and consequently how bad things will be for funding to education in Illinois, are the magnitude of the federal bailout, first of all. It's pretty clear at the federal level that the federal government has an appetite to give states money for the funds for the revenues that they lost during the COVID-19 shutdown. What states like Illinois and other states are looking at is an amount of money beyond that to address some of the shortcomings that they had prior to the crisis. And that's where there's some division on how that's going to play out. So how that lands is going to be very relevant to the long-term stability of the state of Illinois. Do they just get reimbursed for the loss of funds from COVID, or does the reimbursement go beyond that to address some of the financial problems that they had prior to COVID? And then the second impact that has to be looked at closely is the pace of the economic recovery. The governor's in a very difficult spot. You don't want to open up the economy too soon for fear of the rising COVID deaths. But on the other side of that equation, keeping the economy closed too long results, as was mentioned earlier, results in unhealthy stress levels, rising mental issues, and threatens the level of resources available to fund education. If our businesses can't bounce back from the shutdown, the fiscal crisis will deepen and unemployment will remain high. My daughter, who worked who's a manager at a downtown hotel, she was furloughed and she just got laid off today. And who knows when the hotels will be going back in business. And so she's looking at a different career path. This just happened about 12:30 today. Our economy wasn't big enough to support the state budget prior to COVID. It will not only have to make up the loss of COVID, but grow significantly above those levels to get rid of our state's structural deficit. And I'm not sure if and when that'll ever happen. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So without this substantial federal bailout, school funding in Illinois can change dramatically in several ways. The probability of a future property tax freeze, I believe, increases. as the state's going to have to contemplate raising income taxes, although I don't think it's necessarily a good long-term solution. But they're looking at raising income. They may look at raising income taxes and provide property tax relief in exchange for that. And in terms of the finances of the school district, that's a loser, because Oak Park school districts do not get a lot of money from the state, but they're reliant on future property taxes. So it's going to affect your taxpayers differently. They theoretically would get property tax relief and have to, we get property tax relief, but their income tax will go up. But in terms of the school district, that's probably going to be a net negative. Evidence funding may drop significantly, which I'll talk about in a second. In addition, I think the probability of a future pension shift starting next year is going to increase significantly as well. The state pays about $1 billion into TRS for Illinois schools. California shifted it to the schools. Most schools in California are paying over $1,000 per pupil for pensions. And that's how they had to get rid of their crisis before COVID. It wouldn't surprise me if the state of Illinois has to do something similar. Property tax collection percentages may decrease. We won't know that till the fall, but presumably with unemployment at 20 to 25%, there may be some decrease in property tax collections. Property tax appeals will certainly increase, especially as the assessor will be reassessing all of Cook County this time around. And property tax bills will be delayed. The original due date for the fall taxes were August 3rd. That's been pushed back to October 1st without penalty. This is one of the reasons why your school district has a 3-month minimum reserve policy. Because you do have fund balance reserves, this will not impact your district other than through a loss of interest earnings, which won't be that significant. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So total evidence-based funding money, it's been around for 3 years, and it's increased by $980 million over that 3-year period. Most of the money goes into bucket 1. Those are the poorest school districts, the districts that are most underfunded. And tier 4 is the districts that are most overfunded. Oak Park District 97 is in tier 2. And of the $980 million, your district has received $612,000 of an increase over the 3-year period. Next slide, please. There's a 2-step process to decreasing evidence-based funding in the legislation. And essentially, and this is just an example of $2 billion, the first step just takes away all the growth that tier 3 and tier 4 districts received. That's $9.8 million. The additional $1.99 billion is reduced to school districts on a per pupil basis. So there's about 1,936,000 students in Illinois. So if you divide that by the 1.99 billion, every school district would lose $1,028 per pupil if the state cut funding by $2 billion. So since Oak Park had an average enrollment of 6,014 students, if that happened, their loss of state revenues would be $6,182,000. Next slide, please. There's another thing that needs to be pointed out that I think Oak Park needs to advocate in terms of a legislative fix. The method that's used to take money out of evidence-based funding is different than the method used to put money into it. So therefore, under a scenario where money leaves evidence-based funding in 1 year and then comes back the next year, schools will not be in the same spot that they started. And I just want to show you an example. So you're in tier 2. So if the state, this is a hypothetical example, if the state next year reduced evidence-based funding by $2 billion, you would lose, as every school district would lose, $1,028 per pupil. If in the following year, they raise evidence-based funding by $2 billion, they put the money back into the formula, tier 2 districts will get only on average $360 a pupil of that money. So if that money goes away, the takeaway for this is if the reduction happens for your district because you're a tier 2 district, you essentially may never get that money back, even if funding starts to increase again. I've actually, we've had several conversations with EdRed and LEND. There is a legislative fix that we've come up with, but they did not decrease evidence-based funding this year, but if they do it in future years, it's something that we need to look at. Next slide, please. So every school district should know this information. There's 3 things that you should know as these scenarios come up, how it would impact your district. So for every $100 million of evidence-based funding reduction, your district loses about $300,000. For every 1% shift in the TRS pension costs, you would lose about $400,000. So a full shift is estimated at 9 or 10%. So a full shift of pension costs would result in your expenses going up $3.5 to $4 million a year. And for every 1% loss in collections, the district tax collections, you would lose about $800,000 per year. And we have no idea how that's going to impact your district yet. Again, we'll find out better. We'll know better in late fall. Next slide, please. So the next thing I want to look at, or that I would look at with any school district, is assessing your vulnerability heading into the crisis. So we'll turn to the January 20 projections that we presented to the Board of Education. Next slide, please. So as you could see, in terms of your structural surplus or deficit, excluding bond proceeds and major capital projects, the district is in a solid financial is in solid financial shape, with projected surpluses in each of the projection years, this fiscal year and the next 5 fiscal years. Next slide, please. So the anticipation was at the time that those surpluses would be used to fund major capital projects, major non-referendum capital projects of about $33.5 million, which equals about what your aggregate surpluses would be. So if you look at the blue lines, essentially based on our projections, you would be able to fund all those projects and have an ending fund balance, the blue line, in 2025 about equal to what it is in 2020. So the financial picture at that time was solid, but it did not anticipate what may happen to Illinois school districts. And obviously, if that happens, adjustments will have to be made for the district to remain above its 3-month reserve target. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So school districts need to look at developing a transformational plan to adjust to this new post-COVID-19 world. And what we've heard so far tonight is the academic side of it, being adaptive to evolving evolving social distance requirements. And whether that involves the start of the next school year, which hopefully it doesn't, or it's going to happen again some point in time. School districts, and I work with a lot of school districts' sole focus right now is on how to adapt to these crises, especially since we don't know what the end product's going to look like, because much of it is out of control. And I can tell you with absolute confidence, being involved in a lot of these conversations, I work with no district that puts more time into this anticipation and planning how to handle this crisis than Oak Park 97. The central office administrators that in our Tuesday meetings, it's so impressive, all the different areas that they focus on. So they're putting a lot of time into the what ifs that hopefully we'll know soon what that's going to look like. But the part that now school districts need to work on, which hasn't been focused on, is that I believe all school districts are going to have to figure out a way to develop a more cost-effective method to deliver instruction, because I do believe that resources will decrease. Next slide, please. So in terms of immediate areas, next slide, please, thanks. In terms of immediate things that I think the Board of Education and Administration, I would be recommending is that, first of all, making smart decisions under the lens of a possible delay in school closing. So if there is staff that you could get away, so in other words, if there's a staff member that wouldn't work but for the schools being open, and you could delay those hirings, then schools should consider delaying those hirings, because then they could avoid paying that money before the person ever starts to actually work. So I'm asking school districts to look at if there are people that fall in that category. Now, certainly, if you need to hire staff because they might get away and go to another school district, or you need to have them anyway, whether the school year opens up with or without virtual learning, then obviously you need to make those hires. And then and this isn't really applicable at this moment in time for your district, but if there's contractual agreements that you're entering into going forward, you should address the condition that if schools not face-to-face, are there any adjustments that could be made to the terms of the agreement? The second major point is and Dr. Kelly and I talk about this a lot, is limiting the growth in discretionary spending and non-essential staffing for this coming year. Dr. Kelly and I and Felicia have met with all principals now and all department heads. And our instincts right now, obviously it'll be driven by the Board of Education, but our instincts right now is to put a freeze on discretionary spending, those things that we can control, which are non-salary benefits, if we have existing contracts, things of that sort. But discretionary spending that we can control in aggregate to try to keep that the same as the budgeted numbers for this year. And then if there's non-essential staff considerations, that we should consider pausing the hiring of those until we get a better idea what's going on with our financial situation. Third thing I'm recommending, which again doesn't apply, well, the second bullet point does apply to your district. If possible, pause on long-term expenditure commitments until the dust settles. So collective bargaining agreements, school districts are looking towards one-year extensions right now because they don't know what's going to happen. And then major capital projects using fund balance reserves, those need to be revisited through the lens of a possible major change in school funding. All the expenditures this summer that relate to capital are still funds that are being used from the referendum that have to be used for capital projects. After that, the district will be in a position to using fund balance reserves, again, $33.5 million approximately for capital projects. And then another point that can't be forgotten is to continue to address the needs of your students using a return on investment filter. We can't forget that our primary objective is to provide student learning and opportunities for children. And if there's things that make sense and will help the kids, we still need to consider them. We can't just close our eyes and just cut expenditures without recognizing or even bringing in really important expenditures if it provides value to the kids. Next slide, please. And then in terms of long-term, so those are kind of the immediate decisions. In terms of long-term, the critical takeaway, next slide, please, is that the district needs to now contemplate the following question. What is our school district going to do if revenues decrease by 5%? And I would even say 5 to 10%. And this becomes our new base funding level. So that means if you knew, again, we have our projections, we know where we're at. If we know, or if it turns out to be a reality that our revenues drop $5 to $10 million, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to readjust to make sure that with less dollars, we could provide at least the same quality of education we're providing, if not better. Next slide, please. So to prepare for this new reality, and one of the things that Felicia mentioned is that once we get a better idea of how this year is going to play out, we need to develop projections and revise the projections under 3 scenarios: a best case scenario, a most likely scenario, and a worst realistic case scenario. So that's something that we'll be working on and presenting to Fork and the Board of Education. Assessing the district's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Every district is different, and every district may have different levels of low-hanging fruit, may have different opportunities, and I think it's important to do a SWOT analysis on your specific school district. Be transparent and get buy-in from the major stakeholders and engage them in the development of the plan. I think as we heard today, again, I go to a lot of school board meetings. I respect very much the passion of parents that care about their children's education, way more than than the school boards that I go to, where you don't ever have a community member there talking about the education because they just don't care. So I respect that passion. These are very emotional times, and I do think it's very important as we talk about adjusting a budget by 5 or 10% potentially, that everyone's up to speed on what's going on. We present the information as simple as possible so that everybody understands it, and that we get buy-in from major stakeholders to make sure we end up with the best product. Next slide, please. So the components of the transformation, this plan to this change would be effective use of technology and distance learning, looking into shared services, rebuilding the budget from scratch, delivering education with a smaller staff size, and making adjustments to the cost per unit of labor. These are some of the things that the private sector are doing, and I don't like to always compare because we're different in many ways with the private sector, but in terms of making adjustments to revenues, I think there's a lot of similarities, and I think that we have to look at models of what the private sector is doing, and as a guidepost to making the adjustments, again, under the microscope, that we're trying to do it in a way that does not hurt the kids. So next slide, please. So the way I see it is every district, if this happens, which I do believe it's going to happen, even in the comments of the legislators that passed the budget, their heart is in the right place. They do not want to cut funding to education, but you could read it and you could hear it in their voices that they're running out of options to keep doing this. They've borrowed money. They've not paid other bills to fund education, and now they're borrowing again. And the smoke and the mirrors are becoming less and less viable. And whether they like it or not, they may have to make major adjustments to funding. So schools could adjust one of 3 ways. They could not adjust their budget and eventually become fiscally bankrupt. They could balance their budgets without a focus on the kids and just make sure that we got to gut staff because our revenues are down. And then they could be balanced budgets, but they could be academically bankrupt. But what we need to focus on is developing, again, a more cost-effective method to deliver instruction to your students, which is more of a transformational leadership way. We need to look at how to get more from less, improving our return on investment with the dollars that we spend. Next slide, please. So so in summary, the district has put itself in a strong financial position to address this pending crisis. The district now has to develop a plan to ensure both fiscal stability and academic excellence in this post-COVID world. And that's, thank you very much. Are there any questions?
Thanks so much, Rob. It's always good of you to splash some water in our face around finances, wake us up a little bit. So I would love for the board, if board, you guys have any comments to ask Rob. It's very detailed.
This is Holly. I have some questions.
Hi.
Hi, Rob. How are you?
Great, thank you.
Thank you for this work, and also thank you for your advocacy and work in Springfield to get us the most up-to-date information, and always taking a problem-solving approach to these challenges, both with us and with our colleague districts. So 80% of our budget is salary and benefits.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, this is kind of the challenge, right? Because our community wants and small class sizes, and salary and benefits makes up the most cost. And so I'm wondering if there's conversations about relief on the healthcare side. We're going to have to make our own decisions community by community about class size and the number of staff and team members that we're able to have in the event of a financial situation like this. But what about healthcare, and is the state having any conversations about how to provide relief on that side for districts? And I mean, for other things, I mean, this, if anything, COVID-19 has taught us, amongst many things, if to anyone that didn't know, we have a healthcare problem. And so I'm wondering how those conversations are going as it relates to schools.
So that's a great question. What I think is going to happen is this. I think that the focus this year was somehow, some way, originally the plan was to increase funding. Governor Rauner's first plan before COVID was to increase funding by $200 to $400 million. And I'm Governor Pritzker, $200 to $400 million. And that went to zero. But they had to work very hard to get to zero. And I think that was their focus. Now the focus, I think, is going to be on the reality that life in Illinois may be different. And I think that there will be heightened conversations about big things, such as addressing benefits, like you mentioned, because that is a really important topic, such as consolidations, such as statewide teacher salary schedules, such as, just a lot of different things, such as perhaps even a redistribution of real estate taxes for the poorest of school districts, like they considered several years back. I'm not advocating any of these, but I'm just saying that the state, if the state has to cut money, they're going to have to start looking at those big things, and there'll be committees formed to look at those big things at their level, and then school districts at their level have to start looking at big things, such as for those school districts that, I'm just using hypothetical examples, school districts that don't have grade centers and don't want grade centers, but could save money through efficiencies of grade centers, things of that sort. Whenever you cut, the bad thing about a period we have to cut expenditures is that there's no happy solution. It's just what's least bad. So they tend to create very emotional issues, and basically, again, your school district would have to say, how can we cut if it plays out this way, how can we cut $5 or $10 million with the least impact on the kids? And that's when you have to look at, unfortunately, because if the magnitude is that high, you have to look at salaries and benefits. So in terms of salaries, it's one of two things, right? It's either number of staff or the cost per unit of labor. So those are the things that school districts will have to look at. And again, fortunately, your district has put itself in a position to withstand this and have enough to have the time to make adjustments. There are other schools that aren't in such fortunate situation.
With regards, I know, and to your point, we're not advocating a political position on any of these things, but I'm assuming, and I just, as for confirmation, or maybe it's not, that discussions about pensions and discussions about whether or not the graduated income tax, how that's going to play out in November. I mean, how does this impact the graduated income tax discussion? And do you think that the pension discussions get, I don't know, do they get revived or they get pushed down? I mean, where do those two big talking about big issues fall in the discussion.
Okay, so in terms of the pension, I believe if the state, let's say, if the state next year, if the legislature next year has to cut, let's say, $1 billion, I think optically, and optics is very relevant in Springfield, optically, it may look better for them to save the $1 billion by shifting pensions to schools rather than by cutting evidence-based funding by $1 billion. So I think that is definitely something that's where I think it's going to become viable next legislative session. In terms of the graduated income tax, prior to this COVID crisis, I know the governor was pushing it very hard. I'm assuming he still is. I know that at the time there were times when they were offering or considering offering a property tax freeze in lieu of the graduation, to try to promote the graduated income tax. I haven't seen the numbers, but the governor's office is saying that if the graduated income tax does pass, it will lower the deficit. But I don't know. That's all I know about it at this point in time. I don't think it's going to pass. Whether you're for it or not, and I'm not advocating at this moment for it or not. I think it's going to, given the climate, I think it's going to have a very difficult time passing.
With regards, you mentioned some peer districts and that each district is doing their own thing. Is it possible? I mean, I think it would be really helpful for us to kind of stay up to speed on what other districts are doing. Is there a group of CFOs of districts that are getting together and sharing information, and will we have access to the information about other districts and how they're managing this?
Absolutely. In fact, I did 2 or 3 weeks ago, I did a statewide conference on just on the potential crisis. But within the next couple weeks, I'm going to be talking about and putting together like a virtual meeting of statewide school districts to talk about some of the areas we could look at, what are school districts, just like the superintendents regularly meet to talk about what are the things we could do to adapt to virtual learning. The business managers and the superintendents that are interested need to start having a shared conversation. So this is a great point on what are some of the things they're thinking about, and even in terms of their collective bargaining thoughts, in terms of like the health insurance things. And my recommendation is that school districts get more active in coming up with a solution to the problem rather than having the solution being forced on them because the state has no other choice. Something's going to have to give. I think schools need to be realistic about that, but we should be involved in the solution as to how the money could be saved with the least negative impact on us.
So last question. I know this time the discussion, I feel like within the last week, we've gone from an alarming possibility to last minute saving for this year. What do you think is the lead? I mean, we're in May. I don't even know what day it is or month it is. We're in May. And so that money would have kicked in when, and what do you think is the lead time we will have on a major financial cut? Would it be gradual? Will it be phased? Will we know 6 months in advance, a year and a half in advance? I mean, I guess the question is how quickly could this change, that landscape change?
So we're not, here's the first thing the first two things that your district will probably know is how much more money you're going to get in the next round. The state's going to get in the next round of federal, whether they call it CARES money or not. There will be a bailout for states. So knowing the magnitude of what Illinois gets, that will be one of the first pieces of information that's very important to know. The second piece of information that we should know within the next few months is how your tax collections and statewide real estate tax collections are. How much is it affecting your collections? Are you going from 99% collections down to 97% collections? which would be a loss of 1.6 million, or are people in Oak Park and businesses in Oak Park still going to pay their taxes, just taking advantage of the extended date? I would imagine, my speculation is that this is more an issue in the areas with lower wealth than Oak Park. Will have more of an impact, and where businesses have not survived this downfall. But I don't know. We'll see how it plays out. Those would be the two major issues. We won't know. The legislate, now that this is passed, legislators know the crisis that we're in. They absolutely know it. They're not hiding it, and they shouldn't hide it. And I think there'll be a lot of heated discussions, and I think we won't know anything major till the next legislative session. But again, this year for Oak Park 97 specifically, my recommendation would be to do what we can with this budget. Obviously, we can't make draconian changes in May for next year. Do more the following year. Probably there'll probably be some impact next year, but the big 1 to 3 years will be the big impacts will start. I don't know exactly when. Will they get another? If they don't get, let's put it this way, if they don't get another bailout or a major ability to loan from the federal government next year, we will see $1 billion plus reduction in funding to education, because mathematically we're going to have to see that. So a lot of it is out of the control of the state as well. Because even if the economy rebounds, a lot of it's going to have to do with when the economy is going to start back up. Again, I'm not advocating, I'm not getting into I'm just talking mathematically and just economically. With every day we wait to open up the economy, more and more businesses may not be able to reopen. If it was closed for a week, which it shouldn't have been, obviously it had to be more, but obviously businesses jump right back up. But do the businesses have enough fund balance reserve, like school districts, to survive the crisis? So if only 80% of our businesses start back up because the crisis goes on for another few months, then our unemployment is going to stay high, and we're going to have a crisis for a while, because how long is it going to take for the hotels and everything else to pick back up?
Understood. Okay, thank you, Kisa.
Rob, thanks for your presentation. I had a question about whether or not you anticipate being able to provide us with different scenarios on a 5 to 10% reduction.
Yes. So it wouldn't take us long. Once we finalize this budget, which, we're a month ahead of where we were last year, partially because of this, then we could create a 5% and a 10% loss of revenue scenario, which would be not a projection per se, but it would be a hypothetical what would happen. And I think that's actually a good idea. It wouldn't say that we think the 5% is going to happen or the 10% is going to happen, but what would it look like? And again, your district you have a nice structural surplus built into your operations now because of the referendum, because the TIF expired. So that'll help absorb some of the loss. A lot of it in terms of fund balance will have to do with how much of fund balance reserve you use for capital projects. But yes, I think that's a good idea. And I think that the budget will be presented, the draft budget will be presented in August, final budget in September. I think around that time, it would be a good idea to show something like that.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Hi, Rob, it's Gavin. Thanks for that very sobering presentation. Sort of a follow-up on Catherine's question. In terms of this scenario, if I heard you right, it sounds like it's both identifying things for the coming year, even with flat funding from the state, that we can potentially hold off on, anticipating decreased revenues in future years. And then also, is the thought the scenario planning then also looks out at a 5-year timeline or whatever, and sort of looks for different ways in which we can manage the finances over that kind of a time span?
Right. I think that it would show basically just like for future pandemics, you want to be prepared with masks and all that kind of stuff at the building level. I think that we need to be prepared, Oak Park 97, to be able to act quickly as information comes out. That's why being able to assess the impact quickly, and then once we assess the impact quickly, know what we have to do is a very is good to know. I would like Oak Park 97 to be just like it's the most proactive district that I know in planning academically for a crisis. I think that we should have that same type of proactiveness when it comes to the finance side of it.
Thanks.
Yeah. I also think Rob, would be helpful. I mean, I think once we do the projections and Fork kind of weighs in on it, it might be important for us as a board to talk about setting parameters, or at least kind of like we have an equity tool. How do we decide, what types of items that fall under the categories that we say, okay, these are things we want to invest in. How do we kind of make those decisions? So I could see that easily being something that we retreat around. We have a retreat coming up, and we're going to be focusing primarily on equity policy, but I could see a future one where we are talking about, okay, we've made these projections. How do we kind of identify those things that we want to make sure are prioritized? Because there are going to be multiple things that fall into the category. So right. Anyway, there's no like follow up to that. I was just kind of talking out loud.
Keith, I would agree with that, and I think one of the things that's going to be a challenge, and I think this is one of those areas where, as Rob was saying, sometimes business concepts and education, overlaying business concepts into the educational setting can be challenging, but
sure.
Figuring out how do we measure return on investment, right? Like what are the metrics for return, or benefit, and then how do we ensure that we have the sort of capacity, the practices, et cetera, to figure out where we're getting that return. And hopefully that's an area where our partnership with Hanover Research can be helpful, but I think that's going to be a big, that sort of framework may be very helpful in thinking through how we navigate this.
And I think to your points, I think the role of finance in this process, and I think this is very important, is to identify the depth of what needs to be done, and then give the decision makers a menu of options to consider with cost values associated with it. And then again, and then the academic leaders are making recommendations, and the Board of Education representing the community and all the other stakeholders have the tough decisions. And again, it's probably not going to, almost every budget I work with, you could take the budget and use a scalpel and pick things off and probably not have any impact on things, or very little impact on the kids. But when you have to get into it with a chainsaw a little bit and knock a big chunk out of it, it's an emotional thing, and there's no right or wrong answer. So there'll be healthy, spirited debate. I've lived it for many years in school districts that have had fiscal crises, and it's important that we give you, that the finance people give you great information, the academic people give you recommendations, but you have a very, and I'm saying this as a very strong compliment, you have a very active, diverse community with a lot of expectations about specific areas of the school district. So it's going to be very challenging for your school district, because you have so much going on, to make those tough decisions. And again, I don't want anybody to leave today saying that these decisions have to be made in June or July. All I'm saying is that we should start because it is going to be so difficult to do, it's good to start the process now, so that we have as much time as possible to make sure we make the right decisions.
Absolutely. And I think that is the spirit in which we're taking it. As always, Rob, thank you so much. I feel like you always kind of bring really good information to us.
Thank you very much.